Joe, can you hear me okay? Your audio is not coming through.
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay. I would say Joe Kane's audio is not coming through.
Yeah, he's on mute apparently. No, he's not on mute.
Bradley, I can help Joe chime in if he can't get his audio working.
All right. Well, let's get going.
All right. Can y'all hear me now?
Yes. Thank you.
Oh, there we go.
The magic button.
Yeah, I got it worked out. That's all that matters. Brad, if you want, I can kick it off.
Sorry?
I said, if you want to, I can kick it off.
Yeah, please go ahead.
All right. So good afternoon, everybody. This is the breakout session for workshop number 2. My name is Joseph Keynes. You can call me Joe. I am with Task 4 with Stantec of the Lafayette Connector project team. Just as a note, this breakout session will be recorded. So once this workshop is over, the recording will be on the I-49 Connector website after the meeting. Today, we're going to review the feedback form given to you last Wednesday and ask you about your preferences for the signature bridge and the topics that we've discussed last week. Bradley Touchstone, who is the lead for this particular breakout group, will be leading the presentation, but just know that this is an open dialogue. This is a focus group for the Lafayette Connector Advisory Group. So you've been specifically unmuted for this session. Brad and I, along with other DOT members and LCP members, will be here to answer your bridge-related questions. All public participants who've joined us today will be muted in order to avoid distractions and focus on the committee discussion. We do want to note that although we do our best to answer all bridge-related questions, there may be some questions that we have to hold for the closing main session. And this is due to time, so we don't want to get distracted. We want to kind of stay on topic for this breakout session. There's other bridge experts who will be floating in and out of rooms to help us answer some of those unanswerable questions, and specifically for today's focus group topics. Once we conclude here, we'll meet back in the main room and discuss all committee members' input coming out of our time together. So the one thing I'll ask everyone is to just be respectful of everyone else's comments and opinions by taking turns and not over speaking or over talking with other people, and try to stay on topic as much as possible. This will help us be productive with our limited time today. So Brad, with that, I'll give it back to you.
Thanks, Joe. And yeah, this is an open discussion, and the goal here is to really solicit some feedback regarding signature feature bridges and also the complex signature bridges. And if you'll recall, we presented a pretty broad array of ideas during the workshop, starting with the signature feature bridges, as Gary mentioned. These are the structures that use the conventional mainline structural system and then supplement that with additional elements to create visual appearance of the complex bridges, but maintain the efficiency and costs associated with that conventional mainline bridge construction. And then we had 2 other bridges that are true signature complex bridges, meaning that we're actually replacing that section of the mainline structure with a complex bridge where all of the elements that you see are contributing to the primary structural configuration for the bridge. And just as a little bit of background, the reason we took this approach is that there was talk about the need to create this gateway, this moment of significance for the project. And there's certainly a lot of costs associated with structures in general, and then even more so when we get into the more complex. And so we wanted to make sure that we were putting on the table as broad a spectrum of options visually, but also economically as well. And so you know, we didn't want to leave anything out. And I'd like to just pause there for a minute and just see if there's any general questions about, you know, what we did, why we did it, or any thoughts that you guys might have about it.
Hey, Bradley, this is Gary Heitman. I too want to welcome everybody, but just as we get started, it looks like we have 2 LCAG members, Tom and Andy. Is there anybody else from LCAG on here that's not showing up on my screen anyway?
Ashley?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah. So we have 3 LCAG members, Ashley,
Okay.
Tom, and Andy.
All right. Thanks. Missed Ashley.
So you guys are significantly outnumbered today.
And
we do. I mean, and the point of this too is to just hear what your thoughts are, because certainly, you know, the input of this committee is extremely important and is going to give us some guidance as to, you know, what we do next and the kind of information that we bring back to you all in future workshops.
Yeah, I think some of the questions that we had, just kind of clarifications, just to make sure that we're communicating properly, is that there's not just one signature bridge, there's several potential locations for signature bridges. I think it was kind of difficult to ascertain that, I guess. And then the cumulative cost associated with the bridges and the bridge types, you know, that was kind of a thing in aggregation to look at. And I mean, for me, it was like consistency. If you choose one type of signature bridge, should you continue that in the other locations along the corridor? Or, you know, I mean, I'm very simple when it comes to these things. I'm not really much into the aesthetic aspect of it. So
I think with regard to location, we had looked at, for the purposes of all of the renderings that you all saw for the 5 different options, we chose the Johnston Street area for that signature bridge location. But we also presented at the end of the presentation a number of different, you know, potential locations. I think the intent is that there's only a single signature feature bridge element on the corridor, and it would need to be located in one of these locations or another
Okay.
location. Now, if we were looking at just simply gateway features, then, you know, then we have the ability, I'm sorry, this is the signature bridge feedback form. But as far as gateway elements are concerned, you know, I think we have the option to do a multitude of things in different locations. So maybe there's some sort of a gateway element at the start of the corridor and then one at the end, or maybe there's one, you know, at Johnston Street or at Kalisa Saloon or at University. And if we're talking about just gateway elements, not signature bridges or signature feature bridges, then I think that those don't have to match. You know, so for example, you might have something at University that also becomes kind of a dual gateway, both into the city, but also welcoming people to the airport. So I think there's some opportunities to mix and match a little bit with the gateway elements. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. It just was, we had just gotten some questions on the back end of that. And said, I'm not really wanting to express my opinion on it outside of some technical aspects with regards to, you know, how it affects the system and users of the system. So, I mean, the aesthetics of it is more of a decision I would leave to Lafayette Consolidated Government and other partners and community groups and such. But I just wanted more of that clarification of how these things could be integrated. And then obviously, like I said, the aggregation of costs is a major aspect of it, just from our end, if we're going to be contributing funding to it. So no, you answered it perfectly. Thank you. And
with regard to cost, you know, we did provide that premium cost breakdown for the different signature bridge options, which I think is, let me find that real quick. It's pretty helpful, and hopefully everybody kind of understood how this was broken out. But yeah, I think we did get some questions about cost sharing from LCG, like what would be, but I mean, that can't really be answered now. But obviously, you know, how much of a cost, you know, what would be the percentage of cost participation? Like, for example, when we use our federal funding, it's a 20%
cost participation from the local governments. But, you know, if you're talking about something in excess of $34 million, so it's not really feasible from a local standpoint, I'm sure, to have a 20% match on that type of funding. So, you know, that was kind of, it was brought up, but it wasn't really, it was just some questions people had afterwards and such that we were trying to get on the same page with, of how to relay that information back.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
Ashley,
definitely gonna need
this
a
is
funding
Gary
source.
Heitman. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And so you're definitely gonna need a funding source for anything significant.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, what is the cost? You mentioned the Loyola thing. What is the cost participation from Kenner on the Loyola interchange project?
It's a number. It's like Kenner, Jefferson Parish, the airport, City of New Orleans,
Oh, okay.
the MPO. I think it's about 12 million on that.
Okay.
And that was for the project overall, not necessarily for the aesthetics. But you can do aesthetics. You know, we have some class 3 finish coat, decorative sound walls, and on the piers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Landscaping. There's a lot of stuff you can do that's not as expensive as structural things.
And
Yes. Yeah. And I know a lot of that, obviously, if it's not eligible for federal funding, you know, for our transportation funding, that kind of thing, it would be on the local government to, you know, provide that.
Yeah, more than likely.
And I know all this is can be somewhat overwhelming. I think one of the things that we are trying hard to do is make sure that we expose all of the different opportunities that exist, so you can get the biggest bang for your buck, right? So what is it that is important that we express in this facility as it relates to the identity of Lafayette? And given the funding sources that are available, how can we make sure that we're actually, you know, making the biggest impact that we possibly can?
Bradley, could I have a chance to say something?
Oh, you're breaking up a little bit, Tom.
Okay. I think, first of all, congratulations to the bridge guys. I think you put out a couple very good, elegant designs. And I guess I'd also want to remind everybody that this thing runs for, what, 4.5 miles, and it's 150 feet wide. So it's a big presence in the city. It's really monumental. I think obviously, coming from my perspective, design's very important. I really like the bridges. I think those would be a good marker for the city as you move it up and down I-49 or I-10. It signifies arrival. It signifies that this is a special place, different than all the other ugly interstates out there. So I think that's got to be part of the discussion. Again, we don't want to make the same mistake we made through the 60s and 70s. This is so stripped that nobody wants to occupy underneath it. And important about gateways and these signature bridges. I would argue for one.
I'm sorry, you just broke up. You said you'd argue for which?
More than one. I would argue for maybe one that's the structural element that allows for things to happen underneath it, and then other kinds of full bridges, crossing points in the city, like maybe Johnson or University, to start to mark important elements to the city itself. So first of all, I think there are some elegant designs. Again, the markers on the guys were calling them Art Deco. I think the lighting condition would be very interesting. I think maybe that's adopted from all of the simple uh, uh, other non-areas of the facility. So I think it's, we can't miss the fact that this is an important way to help mark Lafayette as a significant place as one is moving up and down an interstate. And then they also mark entries into those significant places. Really like some of the designs. I think you could mix and match. There could be several of those that you could use. And again, this infrastructure is going to be with us a long, long time. So I think we've got to be careful not to be overly stated on. Think about how it sets the city off and how it also sets the state off of showing a different way to design an interstate and the kind of ugly things we saw in the 60s and the 70s.
Well, I think your comments are very well stated, and certainly we want to avoid the mistakes that were made in the past. I mean, some of these systems have not stood the test of time within a community, and that's one of the reasons why I think we're all here today. When you mentioned the potential for possibly integrating multiple signature elements into the project, where you might have a truly complex bridge at one point, and then some of the other elements, let's take for example pylons as markers at other locations. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And as far as the complex element, the signature or focal element, which of the 5 options, was there anything that you kind of gravitated towards?
Yeah, either the single arch bridge. I mean, we were always taught in architecture that structure is important. It ought to be honest. I appreciate the single arch bridge and the double arch bridges are structurally, they spring from the structure that is formed. I like the other ones. But if I did a cable bridge, I'd want it to be structural. I'd want it to be honest. In architecture, we talk about the honesty of structure, that the structure ought to read and reflect the structural nature of the forces that are coming down to the ground, being translated from either the cables or the arches that spring from that. I argue for a pure structural element. That's true, and then it's both of those are amazing structures. I would use either one.
And I think we all agree that structural honesty is important. And with the options, the extra dose bridge option or the suspension bridge option, either one of those could actually could manifest itself in a purely structural form as well. We wanted to make sure that we were laying everything on the table. There is a precedence for these signature feature elements on other bridges, so that aren't necessarily structural load carrying members. I think specifically about like the new Pensacola Gulf Breeze Bridge right now. They're erecting some faux arches on that structure, and that was just a cost thing. It really does have a big impact. So we want to make sure, like I said, that we're providing all of the options, not only from a physical manifestation perspective, but also from a cost and budget perspective. But I think everybody agrees that structural honesty is hugely important, and and I think you're right. I think the single arch and the double arch bridges provide a very elegant kind of contemporary sort of statement for the bridge, which brings me to another question I have about style. We threw that Art Deco styling into that signature bridge just to show how you can kind of pay homage to a style without being too literal. And I think that the single arch is a much more of a what I would call a contemporary minimalist approach to design. And so I think that comparing, contrasting those two different kinds of approaches, is there a preference for a direction that we should take, not only for the signature bridge element, but that then permeates through the design of the entire thing?
Are you asking me or the whole committee?
I think please, anybody, but by all means, let me know what you think.
I mean, we got into this discussion last time about, somebody mentioned modernism. The thing about modernism, again, I'm a student of architecture. I like modern. Modern architecture was reductive. And if you're not careful, if we think about a lot of the structures that were put up in they were very reductive, very simple. They certainly they were designed for what they did, but they could come across as being very sterile. You got to be careful that if you look at a lot of modern architecture, and we could quote a lot of modern things, architects that I certainly hold up as icons. What I liked about the Art Deco was that they were striated, they were marking a certain kind of structure. They weren't minimalist. I don't have a problem if the piers were something that was marked and the state bridge was something elegant and minimalist. I don't think to worry about, because really that's what Art Deco was. Art Deco was first movement in America, modernism. And so I think that from the 20s and the 30s, they were moving to a slimmed down classicism that was moving into modernism.
I think that whole notion of form follows function is something that's been wildly misused and misquoted, and has led to, frankly, some terrible decisions. And that everybody gives credit to Mies van der Rohe for that, but it was actually Lou Sullivan that said form follows function, and he was one of the biggest organic architects in the history of architecture. And I think it's so important to think about it, not in terms of form following function, where function is purely a structural move, but instead form following purpose, where the purpose of the thing includes the structural efficiency, but then also speaks to those broader kind of aspirations. And so if that really becomes the thing that underpins the design, then yes, maybe the piers have in this case, a minimalist appearance, but they're wildly elegant in their form, which frankly may be more difficult to achieve, than just simply, what is the most minimal way to convey the force from a beam to the ground. And so I think that, the degree to which we can define what that purpose is, what is it that we're trying to say about the community of Lafayette, that's going to help inform us in terms of how this thing begins to take shape. For example, is it, let's take the Art Deco thing again, that speaks to the history of the place, and a desire to want to stand up the history of Lafayette architecturally and celebrate it. Another approach might be that we want to make a statement about what Lafayette thinks of itself moving into the future. You know, what is this place? What do we think this place is going to be 100 years from now? And what kind of form can we create that helps to build that image and help grow the community into, you know, that aspiration?
Yeah, I agree. It's you know, it's a marker of the bridge that you have up there about a kind of forward position. So I agree with you. We're having these discussions of cost. To just, you know, you all of a sudden cost, this thing becomes a stripped down, you know, minimalist. That's my worry. And so I think design's important. Design says a lot about a region, and this monumental, we really need to, for the future Lafayette, it really needs to be designed well.
I agree. And I, you know, one of the wonderful things is that we're actually having, you know, that we're having this discussion, and that these opportunities do exist within the project. And so really it's just a matter of how do we maximize the opportunity that's presented. Andy, what are your thoughts on all this?
Andy, you may be on mute.
And Bradley, just to let you know too, Sam joined us as well from the LCAG.
Sam, we've been talking about the kind of the style and the different signature bridge options and locations. Do you have any thoughts or that you want to share with us as part of the process?
Sure. I mean, I think in terms of styling, I think the single arch bridge is a beautiful style. I appreciate the contemporary look and feel of it. If we're building a new thing, we might as well make it look new. I guess for me, you know, a big concern is just in terms of the practicality of the project, is if something like the signature bridge ends up as an enhancement being 100% the responsibility of like the local municipality of Lafayette Consolidated Government, is it worth even talking about? Because we're talking about a mega project. So I just where I am is, if this is in a totality a realistic project, I really just want to know, is this a local expense, or is this a full project like DOTD federal expense? And I think unless that question can be answered in some way, then, you know, we just don't know what we're working with. But other than that, the single arch bridge is very beautiful.
I'm taking notes while we're talking. Yeah, I think that, I mean, I don't think that the funding sources have been fully defined yet. And obviously that's a conversation that's got to continue. You're right. I mean, knowing the full breadth of available funds helps to inform, you know, what can be done. But I think right now, if we can sort of set that aside for just a moment and talk about the validity of the different, you know, design options that are out there, and also talk about style, talk about what this might lead to. So for example, you know, we were talking about this notion of kind of contemporary minimalism and how that might influence the design. I think we can also look at opportunities that this may lead to, you know, so how can we take the gateway elements, for example, and let those become influenced by a particular design theme that we think is important. You know, so I think that if there's a collective agreement that single arch represents the kind of structure that would really, you know, resonate within the community, then let's focus on that. And you know, and how might that move, that style, begin to influence all of the other things, so that if for some reason funding fell apart for that element, we're not just simply left with, oh, what do we do now? But we've got this tiered approach of, okay, best case scenario, we get to do everything, and here's what everything looks like. But then as we begin to, you know, begin to narrow our focus in terms of those budget opportunities, having to make hard decisions doesn't strip us of the soul of the thing. Does that make sense? I mean, that would be kind of my desire, my goal as a designer, is to make sure that regardless of what we end up with, everybody can say, you know what, you know, that does represent, you know, aspirationally what we were trying to achieve with the project.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And also the idea of, you know, having a bridge that actually has a design function, I think is in spirit something I agree with, as opposed to, you know, a decorative addition.
So let's talk about that for a second. You know, it seems like there's an opinion that not only within this group, but we've heard from other folks that notion of structural honesty is important. And so that leads us to the complex bridges. But I also think that we ought to look at, you know, what can we draw from some of the other ideas, or should we, for some of the gateway features? Y'all heard Jeff Grobe talk about the idea of columns and arches, and, you know, should we be looking to create, you know, the vertical pylons, for example, in other locations to help demarcate that sense of entry and exit? Or should we be looking at strictly off-bridge components for those kinds of things?
Why can't you do both?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, you've got that complex bridge component, but then in other locations, you know, the gateways, for example, do we want to look at those? I'm sorry, when you say why can't you do both, you mean on bridge and off bridge?
Yeah, I mean, why are we limiting ourselves
I don't think we
to
are.
one or the other? If we can enhance, I mean, think about at just an economic level, people flying in from airport and moving through university, whether they get on I-49 or not, that's going to be a marker coming into our city, as well as from the north or the south. Again, if one wanted to say that Lafayette's a special place, Lafayette a special in Louisiana, why would we not celebrate that in all kinds of ways, whether it's the marking of a structural bridge, or the way the walls are made? Why would we hold ourselves back?
Where would you think, if we're talking about, you know, these sort of moments of celebration, where would be the most appropriate places for those, just right off the top of your head? I mean, obviously I'm showing that interchange at University right now, but, you know, where along this corridor do you think are those significant moments?
Certainly I mean, if you looked at what some of the ones that Jeff, you know, there's plenty to think about. You know, there were always markers celebrating entry into something, right? So it was a bridge or a downtown or a airport. They were always marking significant landscape spot transition from one place to the other. I think the southern part of the city, of course, once you pass I-10 in the northern part of the city, I think the airport is another part for marker. I think the area around Johnson Street to mark entry into the core, and that may be done by bridge. Then, of course, in the northern part of the city in that area, I think, why wouldn't we mark those each? I mean, they could all have,
Could you repeat you said you broke up after Johnston Street. You were talking about the urban core. And then you said on the northern side, which area?
well, as soon as you, as soon as the I-49 becomes elevated, and that's part of there's all of those roundabouts. Why wouldn't that be whole area be a marker into that area of Martin Luther King? One, I think there's two kind of scales. There's the scale of the entry into the city, which is on the northern side where you have us looking, and on the southern side that marks entry into Lafayette. And then there's the scale of moving into each one of those significant exits, like Martin Luther King, Johnson Street to downtown, and University. Things like could be celebrated differently. They could be relate to the cultural sort of significance of each of the area. I'm thinking about Luther King, downtown, or the university. Each one of those could celebrate a different kind of idea or concept. I think the ones. Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think all of those can be celebrated at a variety of different scales and culturally. They could all be different.
So what about this? Okay, so we've got these, let's call them portals or entries into the corridor at the north and the southern end of the corridor, kind of where the system launches itself, and that's really a passing through moment. And then you've got these places, these significant so that's sort of a gateway, and then you have moments along the length of it. So we've got maybe something in MLK, something at Johnston Street that celebrates downtown. We've got something at down at University that's that demarcates the airport. And then you're saying, and then maybe something down towards the southern end of the corridor that is, again, that doorway or that portal. And so, I mean, I think that could be a pretty significant journey that we're creating for folks as they move along this thing. And you're right, the kind of scale that's applied to each one of these different elements can be very different. One of the challenges that we have with the structure of this size, you touched on the fact that it's 150 feet wide, is the size of objects that are necessary to make an impact, to actually even just visibly be able to see the thing.
Bradley, I'm gonna interrupt you just real quick. I wanted to let everybody know we have about 7 minutes left before we have to go back to the main room.
Okay.
So just wanted to let everybody be aware of that.
Thanks, Jennifer. I was about to say the same thing.
Thanks, Joe.
Well, I think this is a pretty significant, concept that can help drive, the way in which this thing begins to materialize itself, right? So we've got these, again, we identify these places or moments along the length of the corridor, and then try to put some sort of a level of impact to them, and that's a little bit more difficult. Maybe it's an inspirational theme for each one of these different places, so the inspiration for the northern and southern is this, again, this sort of portal, this entry doorway, and then, how big an impact do we want to try and make at say maybe the airport and MLK are of a similar kind of scale, and then maybe the the urban core down at Johnson Street is of more significance or of bigger impact. I don't know the answer to that, but I think there's certainly an opportunity to kind of create this progression as you move through the thing. Does that kind of capture what you're talking about, Tom?
Yes, absolutely.
So this is Gary again. Andy, I'm not sure why your audio wasn't, or your sound wasn't working earlier. We've also got Neil that joined us about halfway through, and just wanted to make sure you guys didn't have anything to add or your own thoughts about what we've been talking about.
No, Gary, we're just listening. This is Neil, just listening along and just kind of following along where we are. And, of course, if I have any opinions, I'll certainly let you know.
Oh, no. Appreciate it. Andy, were you able to get your audio working? Something must be wrong there.
Yeah.
Sam or Ashley, any other thoughts before we have to leave?
My only other thought is just if there's, if we're talking about like the major kind of architectural style bridge or the single arch, something like that, I'd love to see something like a rendering of it, both, kind of adjacent to downtown, if it's say at the Johnson Street crossing or something like that, but also from downtown, because obviously there's a lot of views in the middle of this real like cultural corridor, like from downtown itself, from someplace like Freetown, the adjacent historic neighborhoods, because we're talking about something that adds to the skyline. I think I'd really be interested to see what that could potentially look like from one or two spots, kind of in its, most likely location.
I think Derek Chisholm is on the phone with us, and he's helping with the 106 portion of the project. And Derek, I know we've got a series of images that are being developed that will probably capture that exact idea, right?
That's right, Samuel. Thanks for the insightful inquiry. We are working on a number of renderings, at least with basic the structural types that are still in play. From a number of locations, including from the historic districts, from downtown, from key corridors that cross through Eventual Thruway. We're still working on those and revising those. And then as the Signature Bridge conversation continues, that will feed into additional renderings so that we can try to provide each neighborhood with a sense of how it might look from their location.
Great.
I'm going to, just as a reminder, want to jump in here real quick. We have about 2 minutes remaining, and I wanted to remind everyone and ask you to please complete and return those feedback forms. We do look at them very carefully, and they're really important to making sure that people get their voices heard. So if you would, after we finish this meeting, if you would go ahead and complete those, we'd be really grateful.
And one thing about that too, those feedback forms are kind of guides, but we've covered some ideas that aren't necessarily captured in any of the questions on the feedback forms. But by all means, use the comment area to just write whatever you want to write or that you feel is important so that it gets captured. I think that's incredibly helpful. So, we've talked about, for example, this notion of a variety of different scales for some of the elements and potential locations. Make some notes about that and include it on those feedback forms, just so we've got it on the record. It's
in the main room too, if you would, Bradley, we'd appreciate that.
Yep. Okay. All right. Looks like we are asked to return to the main room. I think
25 seconds.
Yep. So, but thank you all for your time and thoughts, because I think it's all pointing to great things.
All right, guys. Thanks. We'll see you in the main room in a few seconds.